A real pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Esther Duflo. Esther is the Abdul Latif Jameel Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics in the Department of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She's also a co-founder and co-director of the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, JPAL. In her research, Esther seeks to understand the economic lives of the poor with the aim to help design and evaluate social policies. Esther has received numerous academic honors and prizes, including the 2019 Sverige Riksbank Prize in Economic Science is in memory of Alfred Nobel, with her co-laureates Abhijit Banerjee and Michael Kramer. With Abhijit Banerjee, she wrote the critically acclaimed Poor Economics, a radical rethinking of the way to fight global poverty, and more recently, Good Economics for Hard Times. So Esther, welcome.
Thank you.
So I really wanted, yes. I think I really wanted to kick off today sort of following on from some of our morning speakers talking about the scale of the private sector opportunity. And we know that the private sector is the world's largest employer, including the 2 billion people that are estimated to work in the informal sector. At the same time, we're seeing, sort of very large-scale, significant commitments to social and environmental impact from large companies, including in sort of the areas of inclusivity, women's empowerment, and worker well-being. So I wanted to kick off kind of asking you what you think the role of the private sector in kind of advancing social goals is, and potentially what some of the barriers and challenges we might have to being able to fully harness the private sector's impact in that way might be.
So I guess to that question, I might have a somewhat controversial answer, which is also very classical in a way. I do think the first responsibility of the private sector is to run their job. I do think that the first order impact of the private sector is in the course of its normal activities, hiring people, producing goods that people might want to buy. Those are for the beneficial activities. And then also the harmful activities are also in the context of running your normal day-to-day job. Like, you could have processes that are dangerous. You could have processes that are inefficient and make you lose money, but also make, spend so much more energy that are required. You could, and so on and so forth. So I do think that really we need to remember that first order, what businesses should do is to run their business in a way that is as efficient as possible, respect the laws of the land, respect the worker they employ, which usually is employed by the laws of the land, and pay taxes. And then if we do that, and private sectors would spend less time doing engineering to try to replace workers, even when it's not particularly efficient, simply because it's advantageous tax-wise, or financial engineering to not pay taxes and so on. That would be a big part of the battle in doing more social good. And then another big part of the battle would be to do things that improve the productivity of the workers, which are lying on the ground. So I think the first part of it, that the social responsibility of a business is to run their business, that's very conventional in economics, even though maybe we kind of moved away from it. But I think that's first order super important. Although I don't want, at the margin, it's also fine to have other goals. But the second part that I also think they are, and a lot of the work that people have done in this room have demonstrated that there are so many opportunities of doing things much better because some things are not noticed. And what is not noticed, and maybe we'll get to that more in the context of the conversation, but not by accident, in my opinion. What is not noticed is often what has to do with the least empowered people in the workforce. The employees rather than the owner of the capital, the women employees rather than the male employees, the staff rather than the managers, and so on and so forth. So I think by training attention to these segments, you can actually better do your first order job, which is to do your whatever it is that you are in the business of doing. Sorry, this was a long-winded answer. But
yeah. And I guess sort of picking up on that point around, effectiveness, and I think a lot of the research that JPAL looks at is sort of thinking about areas that maybe aren't working as efficiently as they should. So in terms of thinking about how experiments might be able to help the private sector to work more efficiently and effectively, sort of how do you see the opportunity there?
So there are many examples, and the best is to talk about some of these examples. Experiments used to be super rare in industries at all. I think Capital One is one of the firms that started doing maybe the ancestors of A/B testing by sending us flyers, and this you would think is maybe a little bit zero sum in terms of, okay, some people will buy more credit card, but it is what it is. What has happened since then? So first of all, of course, the tech industry is full of A/B testing, but also, and in a more tentative way, but perhaps in an even more impactful way for the two dimensions that I was just talking about before, is work like, for example, the work by Anand and others in the room that identify opportunities that simply haven't been noticed, that if they had been noticed, presumably people would do them. So the example that I think is going to be elaborated on later today is the training of the soft skill training. Soft skill training, again, this has all the conditions of something that might be forgotten. It's the staff, it's the woman staff, it's the non-managerial staff. So these are the people no one thinks about. In this example, if I remember the number correctly, the gain for the firm in training women in better communication skills and other soft skills is in excess of 250%. So this is something that is literally dollar bills lying on the ground. I'm a strong believer, having been in this business for a while, that there are dollar bills lying in lots of places. There are also many other things lying down in factories, for example, flammable material and that type of things. I think we should pick up the flammable material. And it's been demonstrated that it can be done, that firms can learn to notice this type of things. But it's actually more difficult than it seems. And I think one of the things that is very interesting is, on the one hand, identify those opportunities, finding the dollar bills, and on the other hand, and I think that's that's maybe where we can go ahead further, is understanding why the opportunities are not picked up, what makes it difficult. So to take another example of David Atkins and work here, and others, including Eric Verhoeven, is the idea of sometimes there would be gain in production that are not taken advantage of because someone who is key in this adoption is not compensated for that. So that's an example they did in trying to introducing new ways of doing soccer balls with less waste, without paying attention that if all of the gain is captured by the shareholder in the form of reduced cost, and none of the gain is captured by people who are actually making the soccer balls, then that is going to stop at the point or another. That's, again, another example of, eventually, I think a good place to train our gaze within industry is the people who have the least power, not just because it's the right thing to do, but from, again, going back to my question, that let's posit that firms should maximize their efficiency. This is because this is usually where the gains might be lying down, because no one has bothered to notice that they could be there. So these are two examples, and two examples that give if indeed there are dollar bills lying on the ground, then one cannot assume that if something has not been done, it's because it's not a profitable thing to do. But then once we lose that assumption, then there is no way to know whether something should be done or should not be done, or what the impact might be, including on profit, without trying out. And that's why that's of course what opens the space for experiments. Very much like in the public sector, we do experiments because it's difficult to know what works or what doesn't. In business, there's sometimes this idea is, look, if something should be done, it would already have been done. Otherwise, this company would have disappeared. But the few examples and many other that I'm sure several people in the room are familiar to in their own activities suggest that no, there is plenty of spaces to leave inefficient processes continuing for a very long time. So it's not because something has not been done that it should not be done, and vice versa, actually.
And I think that illustrates very nicely some of the sort of way we might think about the business case almost for some of these, sustainable interventions and thinking about increased profitability, sort of reduced costs, etc. Turning sort of to, I guess, an economist's perspective on another key theme of today, which is quality work. Sort of from an economist's point of view, what does a quality job or what does quality work mean?
So I think different people might have different views about what's a good job, bad job. That's a way of depending on where people come, where in their culture people come. So I come from Europe, where we think a good job is one that we can keep. Whereas in the US, I think it's less of a, people are much more at least used to the fact that you might or might not keep your job and get another one or so on. But if we're thinking about developing countries, low-income countries and low-income workers, then we could kind of agree on basic definitions such as, which are absent in many working environments, such as basic safety, the ability to do your work in the best way possible, so to not be suppressed in your talent or capabilities by the way that the work is being constituted. So you can think of some amount of respect for persons in their productive capacities. And then if we extend a little bit from that, and that's in some sense the join of the two is particularly for female workers who are often the most disempowered within companies, is voice, respect, dignity, and unfortunately the question of safety also comes back in these particular settings.
Mm. And kind of bringing up the gender lens again, which is very important for kind of conversations that are coming today. Sort of what are the, I guess when we think about women in lower middle income contexts, sort of what are the specific barriers or, sort of that they may face, but also opportunities, sort of how do we make sure that the future of work works for women as well in the future? And sort of what do we know and what don't we know about how women can kind of fully participate in these kind of emerging opportunities?
So the very first order fact, of course, that everyone here I'm sure already know, but is worth repeating, is that there are 100 million of women in the world who would like to work and cannot, who literally say in survey, or can be estimated as saying in survey, I would like to have a job, but I cannot, because of, one could say it's because of social norms, one could say it's because of the nature of the jobs, or maybe the right way to say it is because of the interaction of the two, is because the way the jobs are structured are not consistent with the social norms in many of these countries. So of course, Claudia Goldin just got the Nobel Prize for her work on women labor force participation, mostly in the US across history. And what she's describing about the labor force participation of women in the first part of the 20th century look in many ways what we can see in a country like India today. This is encouraging because that shows that we can evolve from there. And it also, the history of the US also gives us some pointer of how we might accelerate that process, and also the gain that there would be in accelerating this process. So clearly, it seems prima facie very, very, very inefficient to have half of the population not being able to work, or not, a good part of half of the population wanting to work and not being able to work, especially as the talents might be kind of you would have a more. It's not just additional people, as you would presumably have a wider variety of talents that could be allocated to various skills. Another thing that Claudia Goldin says, which I think is useful to think about when we think about the developing countries today, is the fact that is again this idea of even in the US today, some jobs are not compatible with social norms. So in the US today, this is the really high earning, high pressure job, 80 hours a week, lawyers kind of a thing. And she's making the point one might say, oh, well, fine, the social norm should change, husband should work so that women can take this 80 hours work. She's taking the position that, no, it's actually the job that has to change. No one should have to work in this way. So when we kind of apply this reasoning for in low and middle income country today, typically we think, oh, it's really too bad that there is this very strong social norm that women cannot work. And we think less about, well, is it possible to adapt the job such that even in this low social norm, like kind of restrictive social norm environment, women would be able to work. And I know I'm a believer that social norm can and do change and that they can be directly affected, and I wouldn't give up on that. But from the point of view of the firms, I think it's useful to think, what can we do in the current setting to allow women to meaningfully participate? And it's not easy. So there's an interesting experiment that was done by in Mirzapur in UP by OBT, which is a major market carpet manufacturer. I should say the impetus for that work is definitely the fact that even though in UP, it's not that in Uttar Pradesh, that's in the north of India, the labor market conditions are not very good. And yet they cannot find people to do carpet. They really literally had to give up doing their highest quality carpet because no one wants to do the job. So as a result, literally as a result, they have tried now years ago to say, well, okay, how can we get women to be involved? Because there would be more people to do carpets, and presumably competent people. And it's been very difficult because of those social norms. And one of the things they tried, and this is an experiment that was done in collaboration with J-PAL and with Maddie McElway, one of who is at Dartmouth now, is to say, well, let's try to convince the parents and the husbands and the in-laws that it's compatible with your responsibilities. And I did that, and it was very effective, and a lot of women started working. Only the thing is that it wasn't compatible, that you cannot do an 8 hours full-time job and do everything they had to do at home. So within a few weeks, they reverted back. So there is no shortcut. You cannot just persuade people if, in fact, it's not compatible. So that was an interesting, if somewhat kind of depressing thing. There is no shortcut here. But another experiment that one of our students, Lisa Ho, just completed, is going the other way and saying, oh, how far would it go to actually adapt the jobs? And in this instance, she uses the tasks that can be done from home, and these tasks that can be done from home can also be done from an office, and vary the strictness at which she's requiring from the worker. So from the most, you have to work in an office to you can work at home with your children in the background. And we are in the world of 250% plus effect today, apparently. 250% effect was soft skill training. And she also finds 250 plus effect on participation of going from the strictest job to the most flexible job. So of course, not all jobs can be structured in this way. But I think it's really food for thought in terms of thinking, what can we do to make the jobs more conducive to women, rather than try and mold the women and their families to make them conducive to the jobs? And I'm sure there are creative things one could think of along these lines. Of course, this kind of gels with a lot of the thinking post-pandemic about working from home. not all of the jobs are compatible with working from home, but maybe some can be compatible with working from home, some part of, even manufacturing jobs maybe could be compatible with part working from home, or offering more flexibility on part-time. Anyway, I think the sky is the limit in terms of being imaginative of what could be done. And that's one. Another big that's one first thing. Another big category of things is all of the concerns around safety, which are real. They need to be, in some settings, it is literally stressful for a woman to go to work or to be at work due to harassment, sometimes sexual violence. There is a paper showing that young women do not want to go to some colleges because of the danger in going to literally doing the path. Presumably, it could be the same with job opportunities. So creating conditions in which there is both actual safety and also the appearance of safety would make everybody. So of course, you need to have the actual safety first, but on top of that, you could have appearance. Again, appearance is not going to be a substitute for actual, but could be a complement, could be productive ways to get more women to work. Again, it's like there is this kind of little tension between should we change the norms or should we change the jobs, and from the vantage point of having the jobs rather than the norms, I think it is kind of the responsibility of business to think how can we accommodate the jobs, and then people like us also need to think about how the norms can move. One thing that is interesting, for example, in Lisa's work is that one can kind of trigger the others, which is the experience of work can actually, if it's positive, can actually lead to more tolerance of job itself, and maybe progressively, little by little, bring in the possibility of maybe somewhat more restricting job environment, etc. Mm.
And I think continuing on the theme of sort of inclusion and ensuring that, sort of workers is inclusive of, women, youth, I think we can't talk about the future of work and skills without talking obviously about, exponential technological developments that we're seeing at the moment. And, I think that includes the recent boom in AI. And I sort of wondered how you saw that trajectory and how we can ensure that, the opportunities that the technological boom is bringing are going to also be available to everyone.
So I've made a very successful career not making forecasts. So I'm going to stick to that. I think we just don't know. It's very difficult to predict, especially the future. I can predict the past a little bit, which is we do know that when there are large technological disruption, when there have been in history large technological disruptions, for example, during the Industrial Revolution, when suddenly a lot of tasks could be substituted by machines, it's not been to the advantage of the workers. And it's become somewhat fashionable to make fun of the Luddites, and the Luddite, like being a Luddite is kind of a epithet. But the fact is that in the Luddites were protesting against being replaced by machines. They were not the only one, but they kind of, it was the nature of the technology at the moment. And it took about 100 years from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution for the wage level, the real wage level of the worker to catch up to what it was before the Industrial Revolution. That's a long time, 100 years. It's like several generations of workers who were made distinctly worse off by the Industrial Revolution, not to mention the condition of work and the height of poor London boys working in factory was at the time smaller than the height of black boys in the South. And the black boys in the South didn't have it easy. So this is to show the extent to which that period was tremendously difficult for the workers. So I don't think we should assume that that's going to be this current. We don't know whether the substitution capabilities are as large as the Industrial Revolution. I think that's the vibes in the air, but who knows? But if it is, then I think our starting point should be that it's not going to be good for the workers, and therefore we have to think about how to accompany their movement. I think the position of the firms, that's harder. What to do in this. You can't kind of go under continuing employing workers if everybody has moved to AI for the same task. That's, going back to my first point, that's not going to happen. It goes against the. But again, is trying and being creative in using the AI to augment the capacity of the workers. I wouldn't presume it's not possible. I wouldn't presume it's obvious, but I wouldn't presume it's not possible. And again, I think it's going to be in the detail of each firm and in pay attention to what can be done in the particular production processes, whatever the firms happen to be, that we can see. Like, even at the local level of the firm, can the AI be used in a way that's augmenting rather than diminishing? I think in some cases there's not going to be an obvious application. In some there might be. And searching for those, again, I think hits that spot of doing your first order business while maybe helping smoothing the transition for the worker. But there are reasons to be concerned, I think.
Mm-hmm. And, sort of, Esther, we're talking obviously today about experiments for development, and I absolutely can't close our conversation without asking you to sort of share with this group your inspiring origin story about what, got you interested in, sort of economics as a tool for social change.
So I was, as you might have realized from what from some of the things I said today, I was actually very interested in history, and in particular, very interested in social history of the 19th century. So that's kind of a very interesting moment for France, for Europe, for the rest of the world. So that was kind of happily cruising along doing that. But some part of my brain found this to be a little unsatisfactory, because I thought, okay, how is that changing anybody's world today? And okay, I did buy the argument that by studying history, you can enlighten what is happening today, and maybe there is a change that can come from that. But I thought the chain was a bit long for me. So about 20, middle of college, I was really torn. And I thought, oh, should I continue with history, or should I become a politician, or should I become a bureaucrat? And I decided, let me take a year off and then think it through. I'm not off, but let me take a year away and think it through. And I spent a year in Russia, in the middle of the complete economic upheaval. A few years after the end of communism, and they were in the middle of privatizing their economy, and the whole Russia was a shambles. And it was very interesting. I got the chance to work as a research assistant for several teams, including one, and you'll be sympathetic to that. My advisor, our undergraduate advisor, Daniel Cohen, was conducting a large survey of firms in Russia post-transition, which was prompted by the fact that there had been a massive non-payment of internal credit. So basically, everybody stopped paying their internal credit. So the entire economy collapsed, as you can imagine. that nobody used to pay their inputs anymore, so nobody was giving inputs anymore. So there basically a complete standstill of production for several months. And he was put in charge by the Central Bank of Russia at the time of going and interviewing the firms. And for bizarre reason, he thought I was the best placed person to constitute a sample of firms. To constitute a sample of firms on the basis of no database in Russia in 1993 was an interesting exercise. So what I did is that I took a bunch of the telephone books of firms, and I just had a system for randomizing the page, and then within the page, randomizing the order. So I was kind of doing that by literally randomizing by hand in the middle of the National Library, which is where they kept the thing. And he was satisfied with that, so I thought evidently I had some kind of predisposition for this economics business. But it was so interesting. It was really fascinating how they were doing. We went to this brick factory where the guy was explaining to us that he had no money, he just had bricks. So he was paying the worker in bricks and paying the employer in bricks, and he kept talking about bricks, and we started laughing like crazy, and he was crying because he didn't have, it was terrible. But anyways, so I thought this was super interesting, and also I thought it was really first order, and it was also a time where economists were extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily knowledgeless. So it occurred to me that the power part was interesting because I could really change the world, maybe. And then the knowledge part was pretty critical, so I better learn some economics. So that's how I decided to become an economist.
Thank you so much, Esther. I wanted to also give the audience a chance to ask questions. So we're going to open up for Q&A. Please just raise your hand, and we'll go around the room if anyone wants to kick off.
Esther, thank you for all of that context. I think we've talked in the past about this. Esther, thanks so much for.
It's on.
Thanks so much for all of those answers. I think we've chatted a bit in the past, and I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on more on this. That given JPAL's work with the public sector, there was a lot of work that had to be done to even generate an appetite for evidence amongst decision makers, to kind of like enlighten them that, hey, this is what you're leaving on the table, or this is how you could do things better, and it'll make your life easier. Where do you see the status of business today in that same kind of trajectory? How important is it going to be for us to do that same work, to generate an appetite for evidence amongst business decision makers?
I think you would know more than me because you spend more time hanging out around them, but I think the one thing that was it's a little bit easier with policymakers is that it's very easy to it's first order easy to understand why there is a need for experiments, because it's not that there is a market test for most of social policies. If you run schools, even if they are pretty bad, they are still free, so people will tend to go to your public schools even if they could be run much better. And sometimes, like, people stop going to your public schools, then you know you have a problem. But ideally, we should intervene before. So policymakers realize that there is that you can't just look at the world and infer the quality of what you're doing. So all you have to fight there is the power of the strong beliefs in intuition, that people think that they have the right idea. And one kind of relatively easy way to get there is, instead of saying, education is important, where people might have strong intuition and ideology, to go kind of work with them up to the point where really we don't know to do it this way or that way. There is a clear sense that a choice has to be made for running a program, investing more in extra teachers versus computers, or given the same number of teachers doing achievement-based grouping or not. And it is clear that we just don't know. And some people realize they don't even have an intuition for it, or they have an intuition that it go either way. and they have no way to know in the real world. And that creates a natural setup for why don't we try it out? In business, the difficulty is what I was spending the kind of my answer to the first question addressing, which is there is much more of a presumption that there is a market test, that the bad things would have been weeded out by now, and this is how everyone does it. They would have stopped if someone, and therefore, if nobody does the soft skill training, they must have a reason. Otherwise, someone else would have done it, and they would have done well, and we will be doing it. So that is, I think, the barrier. And to make people, and among economists, this instinct is very, very powerful. If it was profitable for someone, they would have done it already. So I think coming up with example for no, in fact, that's not the case. And I think maybe the fact the A/B testing, everybody knows about A/B testing. The reason why people do A/B testing is not because, I think it's because it's very easy. Not because there is more uncertainty in tech than in organizing your factory floor, but it's so straightforward. But one can say, well, look, people do experiment and A/B testing all the time, and they've done it for a while. So you see, that's how clearly they see it to be beneficial. Now we can bring that same experimental spirit to other things that are a bit harder to experiment on because they are, physical processes, but are prima facie likely to be just as important. So that's kind of how I would. And then, of course, you have examples. Your example, there are so many examples we can now point to. So many, not that many, but enough that we can point to say, this clearly generated knowledge that was useful.
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for being here and for all the great insights and discussion. I'm from Mexico, and talking about the emerging markets and all the challenges you are describing. When you look at the companies, the largest companies from the most developed world actually make more money in regions like Latin America than in the developed world, mainly because they have also a lot of opportunities, and I guess also there are some challenges with the workforce and skills. But the vast majority, 99% of the firms are actually less than 10 employees. And the most important sector is the retail sector. This is very informal. They have very little incentive to pay tax, to get some level of sophistication, implement some IT. It's really hard to imagine how this sector can actually be part of a wave that will improve not just the quality of life of the people there, but everyone else. This 1 out of 4 disappears per month and things like that. What would you suggest in general? I'm not expecting you will solve this problem immediately, but maybe you can give us some pointers. What do you think are the things we should be focusing on to try to really improve the quality of life and also help more these organizations?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting. It's an interesting and difficult setup. The informal workers, the informal firms. First of all, because they are informal, so getting data on them and all that, it's harder, and people are. In my experience anyways, people are also a little bit suspicious if you are going and trying to get a lot of data on them. There are reasons why they are informal and would rather stay this way. But I think you are correct that there is a lot to be gained there in kind of allowing some of these firms to move up the ladder. There are many small firms and some constraint in becoming less small. Some of it are systemic, access to credit. Some of it are, I guess it's also systemic, but it's kind of labor. A lot of these firms are mostly using family labor, which may or may not be the most efficient for the job. So there is research on how to, on those firms, and there is, in principle, plenty of scope to do things. For example, that's where actually the new technologies can help, making, for example, improving the way that they keep account, improving the way that they keep track of what they do. We know that small business training has been super difficult. I mean, you can train, but the impact of it has been rather limited. How do you, we know that on the other hand that access to capital is helpful. How does one do something like avoid the fire hazards material lying on the floor in small firms when obviously sending them expensive consultant is not going to be a solution? So I think this is maybe where there might be scope for the new technologies to be helpful in providing information. For the rest, it's basically a wide open research agenda, and research and business agenda. A lot of people have been looking at, well, is it possible to go and lend them in a way that we can get the money? Or is it possible to go and insure them in the way that the premium are actually being paid? And so I don't think anything is obvious and should be done in this instance, but it's certainly super fertile ground for extra work.
Poverty eradication is the challenge before the world. And there are many things which are being done for eradication of poverty. And one of the reasons given is low female participation rate in workforce. This is one aspect which, of course, the governments are addressing by skilling and reskilling and upskilling, those kind of things. But there is another aspect. There is a poverty of aspirations, and which really becomes a stumbling block in eradication of power. How to address that, the poverty of aspirations, so that you aspire to do something better and have a better life, for you and your children?
Right, that's a great question. I have one paper that looks a little bit at that, which is the female role models. In fact, in India, as you know, India introduced a reservation for women in the village level in 1993. In fact, just now, also in the MP, which is great. But I looked at the impact of having a woman as the leader of the village on aspiration for boys and girls. In their own aspiration and the aspiration of their parents for them. And what we found is that in places where a woman is the head of the village, the gap between girls and boys' aspiration with respect to their career, future career, first of all, having a career at all, and then the nature of the career, and then also the education closed, and the gap in the parents' aspiration for them closed, and girls were more likely to stay in school beyond grade 8 in those villages as well. And we know it's because of aspiration and nothing else, because it's not that these village leaders are in charge of running the middle schools. So that's an example. Another, which could be a combination of role model plus perspective, is a paper by Rob Jensen that looked at call centers job. And what he shows is in villages in Haryana, UP, the kind of that they sent recruiters to recruit for call centers. And in the village where they recruited for call centers, girls stayed in school longer, and they were less likely to marry early, and they were also healthier than in places where they didn't send those call centers. So I think the aspirations can be modeled by the environment. So again, from the perspective of people here who are running businesses, creating the conditions for women to participate, also create the condition for other women to get ready to participate, because they think that's actually a possible skill. On the other hand, I said earlier that manipulating social norms is difficult, but it's not impossible. There is work by Seema Jayachandran in India, in Haryana again, showing that it's that several month curriculum on social norms and sexism and so on actually did change the aspiration and the vision of boys and girls in schools. So we can start by all of the looking at this problem from all angles and chip away at it. That's kind of how most things work.
Thank you, Esther. And I think the traffic light timekeeping here is telling me we're at time. But I think just to close, I mean, to say thank you so much. I think, I speak for everyone in this room that we hugely value your perspectives, and it's been fascinating. I think to close, just to ask you, what would be your one call to action to private sector partners working on this agenda?
Well, I think we made it evidently clear. You can notice the opportunities that exist in your main lane of trade, and then you will see that and try things out. Many things are going to fail or not succeed the way you want them to succeed, and that's not, try the next one, and eventually something will stick.
Thank you.